What's up, everybody? This is Chris Grima from Planet Bars, and today I'm about to do a video on the reconnecting indigenous people and what are my thoughts on the reconnecting indigenous people. Now, I'll say this first. I have no problem with people reconnecting to their ancestry because a lot of us do have a lot of native ancestry, especially here in this country, especially here in California. And there's nothing wrong with learning a new thing or two when it comes to history, because a lot of our culture did come from native culture, but at the same time, a lot of us are disconnected from the native culture. Like, we did not grow up in a indigenous household where we did like indigenous rituals or ate indigenous food or anything. We're all grown up speaking Spanish or grown up in a more American household because a lot of us are born and raised here in the United States, and a lot of us didn't grow up around the indigenous culture like that. A lot of us grown up in the Spanish speaking cultures, and a lot of us also come from either Catholics or Christians, mostly Catholicism, and so we're not fully connected to our ancestry as much as we have some native in us. We're still disconnected to it to this day. Now, I don't see nothing wrong with anybody learning their history or learning their family history or learning what tribes their family might have came from, because that's how there's nothing wrong with that. You're trying to build your knowledge, and you're trying to see different things, and that's okay. But the problem with some of the reconnecting indigenous people, I feel like they really push that indigenous lifestyle very heavily on people, right? And don't get me wrong, it's okay to teach people some things and to help them learn about cultures, but a lot of these reconnecting indigenous people, they pretend that they're like they've grown up with indigenous culture all their lives, or they pretend that they're the indigenous people from the res, or they pretend, or they don't acknowledge that they have Spanish blood. And listen, I get it. You know what I mean? I don't like what the colonizers did. I wouldn't want to associate with colonial mentalities, but at the same time, you can change your name, you can grow your hair out, braid it, you can have sex with a dark-skinned indigenous woman and have kids, but you can never really get rid of your Spanish ancestry neither, because that's part of your blood. Same thing with your native culture. You can never ever like try to erase your native culture as much as you try. It's like the same thing when you have kids with a white woman, and she could be as white as Ashton Kutcher or Renee Zellweger, right? You're still gonna pass that native blood, along to your kids. You know what I mean? You can't erase a culture that you're born into, unfortunately. You know what I mean? And there's no choice. It's not like all Spanish culture is bad. There's a lot of beautiful things that came from Spain too. But yeah, of course, I did not like what the Spanish did to the natives here in this land, the U.S. So I can never ever excuse that. I'm not a pro conquistador person. You know what I mean? I'm far from that. I'm also not a person that's super indigenous, that has grown up in a res for most of their lives. I don't, you know what I mean? Because one, you know what I mean, most native people don't even see us as them. You know what I mean? They see us as Mexican, and you also got a lot of natives that think that natives only exist in the United States, when there's natives in Mexico, natives in Guatemala, etc., etc. You know what I mean? There's natives everywhere. So just because you claim, just because you're claiming indigenism doesn't mean that you're gonna be decolonizing, that you're gonna lift yourself up. That's just not how it works. The way we all grown up in the U.S., you know what I mean. We're gonna have that colonial mindset, unfortunately. You know what I mean. And the only way you can get yourself out of that is just by how you think. You know. And there's no way I could just change myself just to oppress others or just to feel closer to my ancestry. I don't gotta do all that. I just gotta learn the history and keep it moving and pass it on. Hopefully, you know what I mean, my kids or my kids' kids could pass it on, or whoever, you know. There's nothing wrong with having any knowledge in anything, you know. I didn't grow up in a res. I'm a Chicano. I grew up in the United States, born and raised in California. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? I'm a Mexican, half Italian, and I also got some Irish and some German, some French in my family too. I'm not really too connected with my mom's side of the family, the white side, or nor my dad's side because my dad's side is Mexican. But I've grown up around Mexican all my lives, and I feel like the problem with some of these reconnecting indigenous people, when they try to address their own people, they always call them, so-called Latinos, so-called Mexican, right? Like they're saying, like they're basically, they're basically pretending that they're not Latino, they're not Mexican themselves, and that's the funny thing. Majority of the people, matter of fact, all the people that are reconnecting indigenous are Mexican, Latino, Puerto, all that. So who are you to think like you're any different than me? You're not any less Mexican than I am, or any less Latino than I am. Just because you have your hair braided and you got dark skin, and don't get me wrong, I'm sure there's some Latinos in the United States that grown up more connected to our indigenous roots, but most of us, we're disconnected from it. You know what I mean? Most of us, we grown up with, you know what I mean? We grown up in the United States, either living the Mexican culture or living the American culture, and sometimes even both. And you know what I mean? I'm not gonna, there's nothing wrong with learning your rules, but I'm not gonna pretend that I haven't been Mexican for most of my life now. You know what I mean? That's not, you know what I mean? That's not how you decolonize. I don't know. The whole thing, the whole concept of decolonizing is not as simple as you think. You just gotta grow out of certain mentalities in order to elevate yourself and to keep going. You don't have to pretend to be something you're not when you've always been Mexican or Latino for most of your lives. You know what I mean? I can't just like disassociate myself from some of my Spanish ancestry. You know what I mean? It is what it is. You know what I mean? I could have as many kids as I want with some dark skinned indigenous woman. That's not gonna change that I got some Spanish blood too. It is what it is. And I just think the problem is there's a disconnect out there sometimes, and we're not, what I mean, as much as we've been disconnected from it, it's always been part of our culture too. Don't get me wrong. There are some things in our culture that is part of indigenous culture, but I'm not gonna sit and pretend that I've grown up in the indigenous culture for most of my life. When at the end of the day, you know what I mean. We're Americanized. We've grown up in the United States. Well, at least for me, I've grown up in the United States. I got to meet more people from other cultures. I got to like other cultures. So, you know what I mean? It's like I have no problem embracing my own. I don't have no problem embracing my ancestry, but I definitely have no problem embracing other cultures. And I'm not gonna hold modern Spanish people to what old Spanish people did in the past. You know what I mean? I'm never gonna ever forget the past and what happened to my people as well. I'm going always acknowledge history for what it is, whether good and bad. Because that's just how it is. But yeah, that's all I wanted to say. So yeah, I hope everyone has a good day and stay safe out there. All right, late.